The cracks in the wall. It started with a noise. Lena sat alone in her apartment, the ticking of the clock above her fireplace the only sound in the room. It was late, well past midnight, and the world outside had gone still. She was used to the quiet, enjoyed it even. But tonight, something felt different. The first time she heard it, she thought it was her imagination. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching sound coming from the wall behind her. She turned, frowning, and stared at the white plaster. Nothing. Just the same old walls she'd been staring at for years. She brushed it off, figuring it was probably a mouse in the walls or the apartment settling. Old buildings made strange noises after all. But as the night wore on, the sound returned, louder this time. It was like something was moving behind the walls, clawing its way toward her. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "It's nothing," she told herself. "Just your mind playing tricks." Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air in the apartment felt heavier than usual, suffocating almost, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the creeping paranoia, and stood up, deciding to call it a night. But as she turned off the lights and walked toward her bedroom, she heard it again. Scratch. Scratch. This time, it was unmistakable. The sound wasn't distant anymore. It was right there, coming from the wall just beside her bed. Lena stopped, her heart pounding in her chest as she listened. It was slow, methodical, like someone, or something, was dragging their nails across the plaster. She took a step closer, holding her breath. Suddenly, there was a loud thump, as if something had slammed into the wall from the other side. Lena jumped back, her eyes wide. This wasn't her imagination. Something was in the wall. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. Should she call the landlord? The police? Who would believe her? The scratching continued, growing more frantic. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed the building's maintenance line. The phone rang, but no one answered. She left a hurried message, her voice trembling as she explained the noise. But when she hung up, the apartment fell into silence again. For a moment, Lena stood there, frozen. Then, cautiously, she stepped toward the wall and pressed her ear against it. Nothing. She exhaled in relief, shaking her head. Maybe it really had been an animal in the walls. Maybe it had gotten trapped and was trying to get out. Or maybe... The wall cracked. Lena gasped and jumped back as a thin, jagged line split the plaster right where she had been standing. Her heart raced as she stared at the crack, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She backed away slowly, her mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Then the scratching started again. But this time, it wasn't just scratching. It was accompanied by a soft whisper, a voice muffled and distorted, but unmistakably human. "Let me out." Lena's blood turned to ice. She stared at the crack, her pulse pounding in her ears. The voice was coming from inside the wall. "Let me out." The whisper grew louder, more insistent. The crack widened, spreading across the wall like a spiderweb. Plaster crumbled to the floor as the voice continued, now accompanied by that awful scratching. Lena stumbled backward, her mind screaming at her to leave, to get out of the apartment. But her legs felt like they were made of lead, rooted to the spot. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the wall. Suddenly the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, a hand, pale, skeletal, burst through the crack in the wall, fingers clawing at the air. Lena screamed and fell back, scrambling across the floor as the hand reached further out, followed by an arm, then a shoulder. A figure was emerging from the wall, dragging itself out like it was crawling from a grave. The figure's face appeared next, twisted in agony, eyes hollow and dark. Its mouth opened, emitting a low, guttural sound that sent chills down Lena's spine. "Let me out." It croaked again, its voice a rasping whisper. Lena scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She bolted for the door, yanking it open just as the thing began to crawl fully out of the wall. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her only thought was to get as far away from the apartment as possible. She ran down the stairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and burst out into the night. She didn't stop running until she reached the end of the block, where she collapsed onto the sidewalk, her heart pounding in her chest. For a long time, she just sat there, staring at the darkened street. The apartment loomed behind her, silent and still. But even from this distance, she could feel it. The presence, watching her, waiting. She knew she could never go back.